Because that's all any of us do, right? You just are taking in as much information as you can, and you're kind of saying, yeah, this makes sense, it doesn't, this is supported by research, this isn't, you're kind of just filtering, right? And then I actually took a class at one point from a guy, and his course was called the eclectic approach, because it was like, I have gone to all of these different courses. This guy was like FFA OMPT, he was like McKenzie trained, he was Paris trained, he like got to the top of everything. And then he was like, let me put together the things that have been most helpful for me in my practice. And he's like, I'm going to give this to you guys so that you can kind of zero in too. So I think that any course that you buy, right? Like any course that you invest in is, let me take a little piece of this and a little piece of that, a little piece of that, and then make it who I am. So I think that's the big thing with How to PT. I was like, man, I didn't get a ton of this stuff in school, so I had to pick it up over the years. How can I give it to you guys so that you don't have to spend 12 years figuring this out, but maybe at least get a couple of little things to say, like, I'm going to pick and choose maybe 3 or 4 things that I learned from that course. And like, maybe it makes my life a little bit easier. Maybe it keeps my patients a little bit safer. And maybe it helps me, like you said, almost like organize a thought process versus me telling you, hey, use these exercises. So I think that's what I like, principles. And we kind of talk about that all through R2P. We'd rather have principles and ways of thinking than somebody telling us, like, here's how you should do things. So hopefully the overall of this module is just like a thought process. How do I figure out force related to velocity? How do I figure out a progression that makes sense based on the effort or the energy level, the possibility that for my client in front of me. So hopefully that's what you guys found through all of that. But yeah, as far as the spine stacking stuff goes, the best way to think of that is how many joints are involved in the motion. I think that's how I think of it. If I can use less joints and really emphasize a particular part of the body, that's like simple, almost like what we talked about with Mike last time, right? Like isolated movement versus complex movement. That's all spine stacking is, if you reword it, right? So if I'm talking supine stuff where I'm going to be just like lifting my arm up and down or doing dead bugs, that's like basically single joint movement, right? Versus if I want to get to more complex things, now I have to figure out how to stabilize the spine while holding my hip in a certain position, while my ankle's tolerating anything like related to the ground. I need more proprioception, more feedback in order to move well. So it's literally moving from those simple to complex, if that's helpful to kind of like put it in terminology that another therapist might use as well. So
yeah, that's definitely helpful. It also reminds me of, it's another abyss that you can go down, but I listened to a podcast with Pat Davidson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's like a strength coach in New York. And he talked about this concept that he was diving through that was like high ground and low ground. So thinking about external support and the amount of contact you're getting. So like a football player is like a high ground, or a power lifter is like a high ground athlete versus like a gymnast is a low ground athlete. And then having your exercise selection kind of reflect that, whether you're doing like a single leg press, that's like a super high ground exercise, versus like a rear foot elevated split squat in a TRX strap is a very low ground exercise. So it's just another one of the rabbit holes you can go down.
Yeah. And again, it's terminology, right? Like I can call anything, but when you come down to it, there are training principles, and it's like, okay, what am I after? Again, it kind of always comes back to that force velocity curve. What do I actually need for this client, and where's their gap in performance? And then from there, it's just like deciding on exercises. You can be as creative as you want, or you can be as like stringent as you want, like with just foundational movements. But the point is, are you filling the gap? Are you filling what they cannot do, and then moving from there? So yeah, awesome. Cool. Ariel, what you got? How was the week, and any particular questions from the module?
Tomorrow is also my Friday, so I'm really excited about that because it's been a week for sure. I've been like just super slammed, very busy at work, which is great and super rewarding. But not so much questions. Some of this is familiar to me as a former R2P student. But it's actually been super helpful because my week has been so busy, just like the verbiage that I've been able to use with my patients with education and stuff has made me feel like, just after going through this module, I was like, oh, that's what that's called. this makes it easier for me to help educate my patient. And when I'm writing notes, which is my least favorite part of our job, like
Yeah.
this is all I need to say, and boom, justified.
Yeah.
One thing I did notice with myself though is because you were talking about like, do we take 5 steps back or do we just make that small adjustment? I'm starting to recognize if I'm having smaller cues, small adjustments. If I'm using bigger cues, where not bigger, but more like verbal cue, tactile cue, all of that. If I have to do too much cueing, I've probably taken too many steps. So that's been really helpful for me. Another concept for this was like train the plane, to be more specific. Like I had a pickleball patient, and that's been really fun for me. It's just been really helpful in like my plan of care, and like I don't know what to do with this person today. I don't want to keep doing what I've been doing. And I know it's something that Zach told me while I was there that's like stuck in my mind. He's like, just change one thing. You're either going to increase your resistance, your volume,
Intensity.
that's all. Like intensity, like don't overcomplicate it, because I found that I really like to overcomplicate things. And then I think lastly was I actually use this with acceleration decel stuff. I found it difficult also kind of explaining that to patients sometime. And then I got the whole gas brakes thing. I was like, if you're driving a car, do you want to make sure that the brakes work first or that the gas works first? And that was something I used with one of my ACL patients today. He's like 8 months out. And he was like, I don't understand why we had to do all this stuff. And I'm like, let me tell you. So that's just, I think for me overall, it's been just really helpful with verbiage. And like you said, like just organizing my thought process. And I like that, like what you had just said, it's not, this is how you should do it. It's here's a way of thinking. And I'm grateful for your 12 years of experience narrowed down for me, because it's been super helpful. This has probably definitely been my favorite one so far. Was, I think, easy for me to see how it's been applied in my day-to-day.
Awesome.
So
yeah, and that's the goal, because if it's that training module. And I do think literally, I don't know how often you guys do this, but if you have a patient that comes in and you're diagnosing them and they have a particular gap in that spectrum, it is, like you're saying, really helpful. Let me draw this force velocity curve for you real quick. You are really good at strength. Like you have a foundational max strength and you're really solid. You're really athletic. You have that going for you. But maybe we really need a little bit more power, or we need you to be more plyometric, more springy. It is helpful to kind of have some of these, like even like the little, the little flow charts that are going around. You could recreate them for your patients on at R2P, it's whiteboards, but wherever you can write it down, to say like, here's how we typically progress, or here's where your gap is on that force velocity. So that it makes more sense to them. And then you're gaining more buy-in, you're gaining more trust. We'll talk about that more in module 5, but the more you can educate and like communicate with your patients as to why you're doing the things you're doing, and here's the rationale. If we're all trying to figure it out in our brains, we're like, oh my gosh, why am I giving this to you? But if you can say like, no, I know exactly, here's the logical progression. I'm training on a specific plane. I have you working on, brakes, deceleration. We need to make sure that we're able to do that with both legs. We need to be able to do that in different planes. Like, man, does that explanation start getting super easy, because you already have like some of those images in your head. So I'm glad that they were helpful, because they were a pain in the butt to get on this thing, by the way. I don't know why it was so hard to input images, but I was like, I'm going to make it happen. So I'm glad that they were helpful to you guys. So very good. All right. So I think, Kayla, you're the last one. Any particular questions from Mike's chat, from training, for anything in particular, anything you've been thinking on lately? And tell us how the week's going.
So the week has been going okay. We're also very busy at my office, so it's just been powering through. Tomorrow's also my Friday, so I'm very excited. I'm very grateful for that. I haven't been through the module yet, but I was thinking about what you were just talking about as far as force velocity stuff, and it made me think of this one patient that I have who, he's a football player and he's coming back from ACL surgery, and he's like super stiff with everything because he's just a big kid. So my question is like, how much compliance do you work on when you know, like we've worked on it, just doesn't seem like it's getting all that much better. Like, but we also know that his sport doesn't really require a lot of that. So like, I guess where do you draw the line on like, okay, we're beating a dead horse and you're not going to really need this anyways?
Is it stiffness like mobility stuff or more so like that plyometric?
Like force absorption, stiffness. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the big thing I say when this is, so you do want to teach to the sport. So be as specific as you can and make sure that at least what he needs for his sport he has, is what I'd say. However, part 2 of this that we kind of talked through a little bit in the beginning is like, you want as many movement options as possible. So let's say he's really good at the stiffness side of things, and yet he gets pushed into, if he's football, I think you said, if he gets pushed into a position where he needs to be more compliant. So he lands on like a deeper bent knee and has to be able to absorb that force muscularly because the tendons don't have a chance. His knee's already super bent. Can he actually catch himself there and manage that, or is that your injury? Does that make sense? So a lot of times, if you only train what people are good at, the movement options are limited to what is already there or what you're restoring and have worked on restoring. The injury tends to be the movement options that aren't as natural or aren't as good. So then I'm not saying that they're going to get an injury because we all know nothing's predictive, but I'm saying your injury risk might go up a little bit because you don't have as many movement options. So it would not be my like absolute priority. I'm not going to discharge you or help you, let you return to sport if you don't get particularly good at this. But I will still work on it because of the fact that it gives me more adaptability. I can get pushed into my abnormal movements and I can still control them or still handle them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think I would say like, if it's really challenging, is there any way to make it a little bit easier for him? Or is it like a cueing thing? Like, do you feel like you found stuff like that, like a particular cue that he's not really understanding, or like it's higher level things versus, hey, what's the regression to this? Or is it just like, man, he's not like coordinating? Can you tell the difference?
Yeah, I don't work with him a ton, but it's been something that's been like on my mind. I would say it's probably more like a cueing or like understanding of the task, because especially with like landing patterns and then like decel locomotives, like if we tell him like try to be quieter or like, don't stomp your feet, or like he'll change the way he does it a little more. It's still not perfect, but it's better. So he definitely has it. It's just not his natural movement option.
Yeah. So so that would be something that like keep trying, because it sounds like he does need that as an option. But sometimes that's like verbiage, like similes work really well. What does he get, or what else does he do that maybe you could use as like a simile, or like or a different metaphor that like if he's doing like, let's say, a depth drop and you need him to be really soft, if audible things aren't working, like, hey, be quieter, then maybe it's more so like, I need you to pretend like you are landing in mud and you're sinking into it. That's your compliance or something like that. Like the more people you work with, the more you'll realize different people react with cueing very, very differently. Some of them, it's like, you need to hop on the box and like show them because it's a visual thing. Like I try to exaggerate things. So I need you to be quick and staccato, or I need you to like sink, and I'll do that with my body, like literally kind of exaggerating what you're after. I do not know if that's the answer. Like maybe it's literally a capacity thing and he can't do it, but maybe explore some of those cues a little bit more. Sometimes I'll have them like, for compliance, especially, let's say you put a med ball on the floor. I need you to hop down from the box, but then I need you to get your butt all the way to the med ball. Does that make sense? Almost like he's sitting on it, because then they're forced into like, even if they don't get right there, they can sink into the bottom in order to touch that. So that would be more of like an external cue versus a internal, can you generate this cue? but modifications like that might help them just understand, oh, she wants me to go deeper, or she wants me to go use more range of motion in my knees, or, stuff like that. So I would say maybe just exploring some of those different constraints. I've had a couple athletes, I need them